Hey everyone, Geophysicist Stefan Burns here. We have a high-speed stream of solar wind about to hit Earth in the next 24 to 48 hours on the 13th through the 14th of March, and that is expected to trigger a geomagnetic storm. And this is all because of this very large trans-equatorial coronal hole that we have currently on the Earth-facing side of the sun. This trans-equatorial coronal hole having been on the sun now for many months, having done many rotations. And so we've seen it hit the Earth over and over again, triggering these sort of geomagnetic storms. And this is when you have tons of magnetic flux in our Earth environment, going from the magnetosphere all the way out in outer space, the plasmasphere, where you have a whole bunch of highly charged particles. Those precipitate down and alter even the energy of the atmosphere, of the near surface, of the crust, the mantle, down to the core of the planet. So effectively, the entire Earth is reverberating with energy during these sort of high-speed stream impacts. That's expected to come in the next 24 to 48 hours. Last time this occurred back in mid-February, we had a G1 storm from that. Active geomagnetic conditions followed, and then even a quick burst to G2 levels. G1 would be a minor geomagnetic storm, so this is not the end of the world or anything. G2 is moderate geomagnetic storming. But these things do matter. This impact from our space environment can influence terrestrial events here on Earth. In general, when there's geomagnetic storming, it kind of alters the bioelectricity of ourselves and other animals and plants on our planet. Of course, you have alterations to weather. Expect more volatile weather, especially for systems that are already developed. So if you already have a large system, let's say a big rain system moving through your area, maybe it turns into a thunderstorm if this is happening during the geomagnetic storm. We also see a response from the Earth as it relates to earthquake activity. Now for this coronal hole, we haven't seen that much of a connection with earthquake activity. It certainly is large. It is cutting through that equator of the sun, meaning its high-speed stream and that magnetic field that it emanates will be brushing past the Earth along the ecliptic plane like this, but it's not that wide, though it has widened a little bit since its last rotation back in February. But important to note is that there is a very wide and large trans-equatorial coronal hole following right behind this one that will be interacting with us in about 7 to 10 days. And last time that hit the geoaffected position, around the 22nd of February, that's right when we had a magnitude 7.1 earthquake, super deep under Malaysia, the strongest earthquake of 2026 thus far. So we could be looking at a scenario where we have this increase in geomagnetic flux and energy volatility across the planet, and then about a week later we get this other coronal hole high-speed stream to connect to Earth, and then we could get a big shaker. So that and much more to cover in today's video. To better understand this, let's look at our solar wind model provided by NOAA. And here we see plasma density up top. We see plasma velocity down below. This is of the solar wind. So our space environment is not a complete vacuum. There are a whole bunch of charged particles, effectively, that are zooming around in space. And generally, they flow outwards in the solar wind, which isn't just a straight sheet. It's basically flowing out in this spiral pattern. So, you know, the whole universe is spiral. Here we see the plasma density for the front of this coronal hole high-speed stream, because what happens is the solar wind is very fast emanating from these coronal holes. It catches up to any slower structures and it piles up and creates this high density wall. It's called a co-rotating interaction region. That then will sweep over the Earth. That's kind of what gets the party started. That impact can trigger the initial volatility and then drive up the activity levels to, let's say, G1, G2. Sometimes these coronal high-speed streams can actually get the geomagnetic volatility way up there, even to a strong G3 geomagnetic storm. We've seen that before. So here we're looking top down on the solar system. There's the sun, there's the Earth. This is going to hit us right around the 13th. This is universal time. We'll see how accurate this model is, but typically within 24 hours, it's accurate. Here we see our south-north cross-section view. So it's coming out like this horizontally, and we see that this is going right along that ecliptic plane. It's going to hit us. Again, that's the co-rotating interaction region. And then following behind it, we see our high velocity solar wind. And so then we'll be embedded within that for a few days. We see that we exit it right around the 16th to 17th of March. So it's going to hit us roughly the 13th, 14th, and then we're going to leave that high-speed stream around the 16th, 17th. So we got probably 48 to 72 hours where we are deeply embedded in that high-speed stream. Solar wind density goes down. Notice how right behind this high-density co-rotating interaction region, you have this effectively void space where the solar wind density goes very, very low. And these are the conditions that we look for earthquake activity, because there is a pretty strong correlation between high solar wind velocity and low solar wind density and there being stronger earthquake activity, specifically the higher magnitude earthquakes. And so this specific coronal hole, again, as I've talked about, doesn't seem to be the most correlated with an increase in high magnitude earthquakes, but the one following up behind it does. So let me show you specifically that coronal hole back in February. And so we can look at this. We see the date right there. This is the 13th of February, not the 14th. You notice the similarity in this coronal hole. Well, it's the same one as the one that we're seeing right now on the earth-facing side. You see that there's actually quite a wide section here. Here's that other one that I've been mentioning, following up about 10 days behind it or so. You notice it's right on the solar equator and it's much wider. So its lateral extent is greater. And this is a coronal hole that perfectly lined up with the magnitude 7.1 earthquake in Malaysia. Let's zoom forward to that right here. We see it's now the 19th of February. It's not yet geoeffective. That position where the magnetic field and the high-speed stream connects to Earth is right around here. It's not Earth's center because, again, of how the solar wind spirals outward. So we can go forward and look at that positioning. And on the 22nd, we had that magnitude 7.1. So it was right about here, just in general, for this day, we see that it's in that Earth center and geoeffective position because we had just had that connect to Earth, because we started to see increased geomagnetic activity at that moment in time. I can show you right here with our real-time solar wind. This is going back 30 days now. So we see this storm that we had from the coronal hole that's about to hit us one rotation ago. We see G1 storming there, then even that burst of G2 storming. We see our solar wind velocity went up to about 700 kilometers per second, 650, even touching 700 at one moment in time. That's very fast. Normal solar wind velocity is 400 kilometers per second, 350 kilometers per second, in that 3 to 450 zone. And we see we had this second high-speed stream following behind it. That's the one that we're really watching for later in March, especially as it relates to earthquake activity. But we see here on the 22nd, which is when we had that big earthquake in Malaysia, we are clearly now starting to get hit by that high-speed stream. Geomagnetic activity was elevated, and that continued to come in over the next few days. And then we had this long slide down with the solar wind speed as we exited that stream. We see that impact really came in on the 21st, and we were well within that solar wind structure by time that earthquake occurred. We can look at our earthquake data right here, thanks to the USGS. And so this is all earthquakes for the past month. If we zone in right here, we see our deep magnitude 7.1 at 619 kilometers down, basically 620 kilometers down. And we see it was on the 22nd at 1657 universal time. So right when we're in that coronal hole high-speed stream, boom, we get the strongest earthquake in 2026 thus far. And we could be having more significant earthquake activity like that coming up before the end of February. So that's interesting because typically we get a lot of earthquake activity along these subduction zones for the Ring of Fire, specifically in this area. And looking at the historic data, there's really no earthquake activity of this magnitude in that location where we had it. So that is very interesting. And what I'm looking at as well right now is where are we seeing a seismic response? So that area had the 7.1, probably not going to be the next area to have a big earthquake, because at some point we will have a big earthquake, right? Well, we just had this magnitude 6 deep earthquake in Italy. And this is not necessarily guaranteed to have a follow-up, but this entire area right now has been pretty active. So we see that this was at 381 kilometers down, directly underneath Campi Flegrei supervolcano, by the way. I covered that in my last video. Also Vesuvius, of course, being nearby, a very powerful volcano with a lot of history behind it with Herculaneum and Pompeii. We've been seeing interesting activity near its antipodal region. And so if we go to our latest earthquake data, we see here we just had a magnitude 5.1 pop off in Greece. This follows up after the magnitude 5.5, which was back on the 8th of March. So here we have a magnitude 5.5 right here, okay, on the 8th of March. And then we go over here, we see Italy. There is our magnitude 6 on the 9th of March. And then just a couple days later, here we see a magnitude 5.1. And so there's definitely been an increase in seismic activity across the Mediterranean. We also see this 5.1 for Turkey. That was back on the 9th. So a notable seismic increase for the Mediterranean for sure, because this is the strongest earthquake that Italy's had since 2016. And then you add in this magnitude 5.5, 5.1 burst in Greece, and that's following up after that magnitude 6 with that latest 5.1 that just came in as we're recording this a few minutes ago, like literally 30 minutes ago. So that is quite significant. If we look here, we see a lot of activity near the antipode. So the antipode for the Mediterranean is basically the Kermadec Trench, okay? Specifically, the antipode for that magnitude 6 earthquake in Italy is more about like over here. But there's a little bit of wiggle room with these antipodes. You know, we're not looking specifically at the exact opposite side of the Earth. There's a range, and if you're roughly in range, then you're at that antipode, okay? And there's clearly, based off of what I've been tracking, what others have been tracking for years now, there's clearly some sort of vertical stress dynamic with the Earth. And so when you have these sort of tension lines get disrupted, you can have things pop off on other sides. And we often see a big quake and an antipodal quake and back and forth like this. So if we look right here, look at this. We have 6 magnitude 5+ earthquakes just in the past 2 days from the Kermadec Trench, right near that antipode for the magnitude 6, and also Greece and all this and more. So 5.3, 5.2, 5.5, 5.2, 5.1, 5.0. Of course, there's going to be magnitude 4s and 3s in there, but we don't have that data with the USGS. They only pick up the big quakes globally. You would need a high resolution seismic system right in this area to pick up those lesser ones. Maybe the New Zealand seismic network has that, etc. But in general, 6 magnitude 5+ quakes, all within about 24 hours of each other, near that antipode of the magnitude 6 in Italy, underneath Campi Flegrei supervolcano. And keep in mind too, the largest volcanic eruption in the 21st century was just slightly to the north with Hunga Tonga Ha'apai, and that was back in January of 2022. So you start to put all the pieces together and things are really getting interesting here. No guarantee that we have something really big about to happen, but certainly I would say if we're looking at this like a weather forecast, we should be looking at these areas closely and attributing a higher risk probability for there to be a higher magnitude event, both here in the Kermadec Trench, because clearly we're seeing a swarm there, magnitude 5 swarm, and also in the Mediterranean. So those are the 2 areas that I would really be watching for the remainder of February at this moment in time. And this is probably, if we are going to get something to happen, it's probably going to be when this coronal hole is geoeffective, and that will be about 8 or 9 days after this next one coming up in just 24 to 48 hours. So that's again the 13th, 14th. So let's add 8 days to the 14th. That takes us around the 22nd of March. It's probably going to be actually more like the 20th or 21st of March. So right around equinox. So we have a pretty big energy spike coming in based off of this forecasting right for spring equinox or March equinox, which is a powerful energetic moment. And that will be when the sun is conjunct Neptune and Saturn. Right around that time frame of the end of March, we have the sun moving into that alignment with the great conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, which occurred back on February 20th, but they're still very close together, well within orb. And you're having Mars follow up behind the sun. You have Mercury following up behind the sun. You have Venus actually right now conjunct Saturn, a little bit ahead of Neptune. So you have this big movement of planetary energy also to that degree point in the sky, which has been well known to be very, very important for thousands of years. The equinox points, the solstice points are some of the most important energetic angles, you could say, that we know of in our solar system, because that's when our tilt axis forms these very special alignments with the Earth, either perfectly parallel or perpendicular. So a lot coming up around equinox, but first we have this coronal hole high-speed stream. We are likely to get a G1 geomagnetic storm from that. Could be G2, so minor to moderate. I don't think if we get G2 it's going to last that long, but in general just more energetic flux for our planet as a result of this, and this also affects us, our behaviors, our consciousness, and more, individually to the whole collective. So with everything that's happening right now, all the chaos and madness, and there's also a lot of wonderful things too, right? It's good to apply yourself in that direction, but expect some of this other stuff to maybe get even more wild. This is certainly just going to bump up the energy level overall. So take this energy and put it towards a positive purpose and use. Consciously, that would be my recommendation, but just be mindful that not everyone is going to do that. And so there are disruptions across the full gamut that can result. So that's why it's really good to, kind of get in your zone, your flow state, do your thing. And I think you can see a lot of positive benefits and results from that. This is a time of initiation with the equinox coming up. This is that, spring is coming, the seeds are sprouting. What are you going to plant now? What seeds are you going to sow that will then, bear fruit later? That is something to keep in mind as well. So that's coming up around the new moon too. A lot of beneficial energy also coming together at this time. So that is your update for today on what is happening with the sun and with the earth energetically, and a bit of a forward-looking forecast for the next 10 days or so. I've been your host, Stefan Burns. Thank you all so much for watching. Please smash that thumbs up button to help the channel grow. If you'd like to stay up to date on everything that's happening with the earth energetically, like everything we discussed in today's video, earthquake activity, volcanoes, solar activity, space weather, planetary alignments, metaphysics, and more, I am your guy, your cosmic bro. So thank you all so much. Wishing each and every single one of you well. Please take care of yourselves. I'll see you all in the next video.